Today we get to do our first lesson on factoring, and it's going to focus on factoring the GCF. This method that we're going to be using today will actually end up being the first step of every polynomial that we will ever factor when we get to factoring completely later on in the chapter. But for today we're just going to focus on the GCF. And you guys have something to pull from for this. In 6th and 7th grade, you looked at factoring the GCF with something like that, 10x plus 2. That was more like 7th grade. And 6th grade was more like this. If you had 3 plus 12, you needed to know that you could pull out a 3 and then change it to 1 plus 4. Here, you knew that you could pull out a 2, and then in parentheses left over would be 5x plus 1. So we have this to pull from, which is going to be really helpful. What we're doing today is basically unrainbowing. And in order to do that, we're looking for the largest number that goes into each coefficient and also the most of each variable that can come out. So for this one, the first thing that we're going to look at is the coefficients. So if I'm looking at just the coefficients, I have 4, -16, 8, and 12. So I know the greatest common factor that can come out of all 4 of those coefficients would be 4. Next, I'm going to look at the x's, or my variables. In this case, it's x. So for my variables, I have x to the power of 4. Well, I don't have 4 x's here, so I like to start over on the right-hand side, and the most x's that I can pull out is 1, because this last term here only has 1x. Pull that out. And now I'm going to figure out what's left in my parenthesis. What needs to be in my parenthesis is what I could multiply 4x by to have it get back to my original problem. So here, if I pull 4x out of x to the power of 4, I have x cubed left. If I pull 4x out of -16x cubed, I have -4x squared left. If I pull 4x out of 8x squared, I have 2x left. And this last term here, if I pull 4x out of 12x, I'm left with just 3. And again, you want to be able to go backwards, work your way backwards, and make sure, especially as this is new to you guys in the beginning, you can double check that you got it correct by rainbowing back in that 4x or what you pulled out to make sure that it lines up. So just to show you that this in purple would be my answer, you factored the GCF. That was our goal today. This is just a quick check here. If I put 4x back in, I'm left with 4x to the power of 4. When I multiply the next term, I'm left with -16x cubed. Here I have 8x squared. And the last term I have plus 12x. So that does check, that worked. So the next, if you have the notes in front of you, it says try, and there are 3 examples. I'm actually going to have you try that at home. If you don't have the notes printed, you can still try it on scrap paper. So I'm going to show you the 3 tries. This is 12a squared minus 9a. So you can pause that and write it down. I'll show you the next one. The next one's going to be 18x squared plus 12x. And the last one I want you to try on your own, this one's a trinomial, there are 3 terms, 96x cubed minus 48x squared plus 60x. So if you're at home trying this on your own now, I want you to pause it because I'm going to show the answers now. The answer to that first one is going to be 3a is the GCF, and in parentheses I'm left with 4a minus 3. The answer to the next, try it on your own, is 6x as the GCF. It can come out, and I have 3x plus 2 left in the parentheses. And the last, try it on your own, 12x can pull out as the GCF, and inside the parentheses I'm left with 8x squared minus 4x plus 5. So that is factoring the GCF. The next part of today's lesson is actually factoring in order to solve, which is our goal in this whole thing. And when we're solving a polynomial, when we're factoring to solve, there are 4 things that you can call your answer, I guess. You can have solutions. You can say I'm finding the solutions. You can say I'm finding the roots. I'm finding the x-intercepts, or I'm finding the zeros. And what we're doing when we're solving a polynomial is we want to know if we graphed that polynomial, where would the graph cross the x-axis? and it's going to cross in multiple places. So when I have a quadratic, which is when I have a variable squared as my highest degree, that means it's going to cross the x-axis twice. And that's basically, we're really going to be focusing on those in algebra. When you get to algebra 2, you will work with polynomials with higher degrees and finding those roots or those solutions or zeros or x-intercepts. But for this year, we're going to find 2, and we have a degree of 2. So the how to, I guess, step by step. The first step, and this is going to be for any polynomial, not just factoring the GCF, we're always going to set a polynomial equal to 0 when we're solving it. That's step 1. Step 2, in this case, we're going to factor out the GCF, which is also going to be helpful in factoring any polynomial that we do in the future. So step 2, factor the GCF. And in order to solve, we set it equal to 0. So down here in that blank, if you're filling in the notes, is the 0 product property. So here, the first example, we're going to do the same thing as above. I'm going to do one with you, and then I'll show you guys 3 that you can try on your own. So step 1 in that step-by-step, the step-by-step directions say set equal to 0. So right now I have, draw my line to separate it. Right now I have 9y squared on the left and 21y on the right. Well, I'm going to move that 21y over by subtracting. And a few of you know who you are. You forget to subtract. Be careful. Don't just toss that 21y on the other side and keep it positive. Make sure you're moving it over how you need to be moving it over. So show your work there. So minus 21y. So on the left, I'm left with 9y squared minus 21y, and it's equal to 0. So I did that first step. That was step 1. I set it equal to 0. Next, I'm going to factor out the GCF, what we just learned above. So I'm looking at this term and this term, those coefficients, I should say. And if I'm looking at 9 and negative 21, well, I can take a 9 out of those coefficients. Now I'm going to look at my variables. I have a y squared and a y. So the biggest variable that I can take out of that is going to be y. And in parentheses, I'm left with y minus 3. And that's still equal to 0. So that was that second step. I factored the GCF. And then step 3 says to set each factor equal to 0 to solve. So what I'm talking about there, I'm just going to kind of separate these. I have 2 factors. I have 9y and I have y minus 3. So I'm going to say 9y equals 0. And I'm also going to say y minus 3 equals 0. And I'm going to solve those. So if I divide by 9 here, y just equals 0. And if I'm getting y alone on this one, I would add 3 to both sides, so y would equal 3. So my roots here, my solutions, my x-intercepts, my zeros, the answer for this would be 0 and 3. That means that when I graph this, the graph, it's going to be called a parabola eventually, it's going to hit that or go through that x-axis at 0 and 3. Now I'm going to have you guys try 3 on your own. Again, I'll show you, pause it so you can write them down, and then I'll just put the answers up. The first one we're going to try is 12h squared equals 36h. The next one's q squared equals negative 16q. And the last one's 4k squared equals 8k. So pause it so you can try it, because I'm going to show you guys the answers now along with the work. The answer to the first one is going to be 0 and 3. The answer to the second one is 0 and negative 16. And the answer to the third one is 0 and 2. So that concludes today's lesson. Make sure, as always, you reach out if you need help. Come to a Zoom, remind, email. I love hearing from you guys. And I will see you in 2 days with another video on factoring.